where folks got together and talked about their vision for an energy and climate future for their community, for their family, and for the state of Illinois. So this has been a pretty inspiring mobilization of activists and leaders that have just joined the clarion call for climate action across the world, and more importantly, a just and equitable clean energy future. But as we all know, taking on climate is not easy. Even when there's a will to act, there's difficulty getting action done. Many people, good people, thoughtful, caring people, still see climate as a fight that is just too big. It's a problem for far-sighted treaties and faraway lands, or an issue that politicians and bureaucrats in DC must decide. But, got some news about what we do here locally that shows that our actions and what we could do here are just as important. We create more carbon pollution here in the Midwest than Canada, Mexico, and Australia combined. If we were a country here in the Midwest, we would be the 5th largest polluting country in the world, ahead of Japan and nipping on the heels of Russia. That's the electricity we use, that's the cars we drive, the buildings we live in. And guess what? These are all things that we have the power to change right here in Illinois. We don't need to wait for DC to change or Trump to have a change of heart. We can take action here today. So we must. Let's see if I could get this slide to move. Hold on one second. There we go. So even in these trying times, we can't lose sight of the need to build a clean energy economy that is sound, strong, and resilient. Earlier this year, Governor Pritzker, in his State of the State address, committed to passing new clean energy legislation this spring that reduces carbon pollution, promotes renewable energy, accelerates electrification of our transportation sector, and puts consumers and climate first, not the utility companies. We've been sounding this alarm for months now that we are at a critical point in Illinois' energy future. The decisions we make in the very near term here will determine the path that we want to take as a state. Will we pursue a path that focuses on reducing carbon and lifting up equity and accelerating the development of renewables, tackling pollution in the transportation sector? Or will we bow to the whims of Trump and chase the path backwards to kind of the cloudy murk of a fossil economy? We know there are several reasons why we need to act right away. The first and foremost is climate change simply is not waiting. The action on climate cannot wait. Last summer in July was the hottest month in history. All 102 counties in Illinois were declared agriculture disaster areas due to the extreme weather. We don't have 10 years to figure this out. We have 10 years to solve it. Second, we need to stop the Trump administration's fossil fuel bailout rate hike. We'll talk more about this in a little bit, but as some of you are aware, there are Trump appointees at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that are changing electricity market rules to prop up dirty fossil fuels, which will result in Illinois consumers paying hundreds of millions of dollars more each year for dirty energy that we won't use and don't need. Third, we're facing a renewable energy bust in the state, likely until 2024. Last fall, the Illinois Power Agency announced that because of limited renewable energy resource funds, it may not be able to do more renewable energy development until 2024. It may even have to cancel existing renewable energy contracts. Just 2 weeks ago, the last incentive programs for larger rooftop solar projects closed. Community solar incentives closed a year ago. We expect residential rooftop to do well this summer, but then hit a wall later this year. But I don't think Illinois is done with renewables. And then fourth on here, which is very important for folks in central and southern Illinois, is we need to support our communities and our neighbors. Last year, the power company Vistra, which owns the former Dynegy coal plants in central and southern Illinois, fought for and received rule changes at the state that let it close 4 coal power plants in central and southern Illinois while keeping its cleaner burning plants while closing, right, keeping open its dirtiest plants while closing its cleaner plants, and leaving no plans for its workers and communities. These were sudden closures. They happen in months, not planned for years ahead. These communities are facing budget disaster in their schools and local governments. And more importantly, they're trying to figure out what their economic future looks like. In normal times, these are things that cannot wait. And in extraordinary times, they are essential. So what's happening now? What's the latest? There's no surprise that the impact of the novel coronavirus 19 has been pretty widespread. The fact that we're all on this video conference right now is evidence to that. But because of this, the Illinois General Assembly has suspended session in Springfield. I say indefinitely. It's not clear when they will come back. They're still trying to figure that out. They surely will get together to pass a state budget and any other emergency action items to do with this public health outbreak. But it's unclear whether any other legislation will get done by May 31st. That's something that we are trying hard to get energy and ambitious but realistic energy legislation on the agenda for this spring. But there are other things that are obviously dominating the agenda right now for leaders in Springfield. Just 2 weeks ago, at the beginning of March, the governor's office had just started convening a series of working groups to put together this comprehensive energy bill they wanted passed by May. These were large groups full of stakeholders that were heavily involved in all sectors of the energy economy. Several folks on this call have been involved in that. Several folks who are pushing for either one piece of policy or multiple pieces of policy, and they were just getting started. They wanted to follow a structure that worked well for the cannabis legalization efforts last spring, where they had working groups coming in and presenting ideas and topics for narrowing or expanding legislation. Unfortunately, because of all our efforts to pursue social distancing, those working groups have been suspended for now. The governor's office is obviously extremely busy managing the near-term crisis with regard to the pandemic. Also last week, we found there was some other news announced as well at PJM. And when we go into the capacity market section, we'll talk about this some more. But when we talked about a previous reference to the Trump administration's bailout of the fossil fuel industry, there is an opportunity for Illinois to do something about that. And some of you are well aware of this. Others will be learning about it on this call. But the auction where these prices and this bailout would go into effect if we do nothing will likely happen sometime between December and January. However, last week, PJM, the grid operator that serves Northern Illinois and about 13 other states in the District of Columbia, said that they will delay their auction and the implementation of this order until March 31st of next year to allow states that are pursuing alternative options to opt out of their auctions the time they need to get that done. So they said if states were to pass legislation by May and request a delay, then they would delay their auction till March 31st of next year, which means Illinois would have 9 months to put together our own capacity procurement plan in advance of that auction. That's a tight but very workable timeline. The downside is if we don't act until November and PJM doesn't approve any delays, then customers in Northern Illinois would for sure miss the next 2 auctions and most likely 3 auctions, being stuck with the Trump administration's higher costs for capacity and bailout of the fossil fuel generators until June 2025 at the earliest. Over that time, the fossil fuel generators will likely bring in from customers in Northern Illinois more than $3.5 billion for that small delay. This may seem like heady challenges, and it may seem insurmountable, but I think there's good hope and willingness to work together to find solutions here. And I think that if we work together to find solutions in an expeditious way, we may be able to get action done, even if not by May, soon thereafter, or even if in November, pursue delays at PJM that allow us to develop and design the clean energy future that we are trying to design and develop without being kneecapped by the Trump administration. This we'll talk more, I think, towards the end of this, probably in the Q&A about what's next. But until, we don't have an answer on some of this uncertainty. And so it might be more helpful to figure out what is in it rather than what is in the policy, what's in this plan, rather than the what ifs of what might not happen. I think there's still a lot of optimism that this is a matter of when, not if, but timing does matter. So as I talked before, the Clean Energy Jobs Act is one of the most community-driven energy bills ever put together in this country. It's not something that was written by utilities, by large energy companies, or multi-billion-dollar companies. This was something that really was part of a ground-up process through the Listen, Lead, Share events that the Clean Jobs Coalition has worked on since the start of 2018. That's over 2 years ago now, over 100 events, thousands of participants. And what we really identified a part of this is a comprehensive bill is really necessary. You can't invest in new renewable energy development without thinking about how that investment can build wealth and equity in low-income communities, or help address grid needs in central and southern Illinois as coal plants close. When you start to reduce pollution from the transportation sector, you have to think about how all those new electric vehicles impact the electric sector as well. That's both on the emissions side and on the grid side. The Clean Energy Jobs Act is that comprehensive bill. It focuses on putting jobs and equity at the center of a clean energy future, puts Illinois on a path to 100% renewable energy, saves consumers money through capacity market reform, reduces consumer energy bills through energy efficiency, it supports fossil fuel workers and communities, it reduces pollution from the transportation sector, it ensures utility accountability, and it achieves a carbon-free power sector in Illinois by 2030. I'm going to go into each of these pieces one by one. First, jobs and equity are at the heart of the Clean Energy Jobs Act. The growing clean energy economy in Illinois can be a vehicle for expanding equitable access to quality jobs, economic opportunities, and wealth creation. The Clean Energy Jobs Act, all told, all the different components together, will result in a direct investment of $2 billion in low-income and environmental justice communities through the year 2030. That's through several essential pieces. First, this will create an exciting new effort called the Clean Jobs Workforce Hubs. It's a consortium of career pipelines to support people entering the clean energy workforce, from training and apprenticeship programs to stipends and career counseling, that focuses not just helping on getting one job, but coming up and defining a career in the clean energy and energy, electrical, or other similar workplaces. Second, the Clean Energy Jobs Act and the Future Energy Jobs Act before it create opportunity for people to not just get hired in the clean energy industry, but to create new clean energy businesses. This is done through a new clean energy contractor incubator that realizes that a lot of the incentives and programs that we've developed in FEJA and now CEJA really allow anyone to come in and start a business. You don't need to bring in a large company from out of state. We can develop a series and a network of local installers and local developers doing rooftop solar, energy efficiency, electric vehicle installation, others, by utilizing and leveraging the easy access to rebates that anyone can use to start and form a business. But they need help. There's a significant amount of support that we need to provide to help those businesses get going, get technical assistance, get financing, get support so they can go out and start an effective new business and grow and hire more and more people of their own. Further, the Clean Energy Jobs Act will greatly expand solar for all. This is a program originally created in the Future Energy Jobs Act to ensure equitable investment in solar in low-income and environmental justice communities, access around community solar, expansion of rooftop solar capabilities, and tying that to the workforce training pipeline. When we talk also about investments, we cannot forget that the cheapest form of energy that we spend money on is the energy we don't use. We, as part of the Clean Energy Jobs Act, will expand energy efficiency for low-income customers, focusing on home retrofits and deep home retrofits, health and safety improvements, and long-lasting investments. We also want to put the community back in community solar, ensuring at least 25% of all community solar is organized and directly benefiting the communities they are serving. Finally, as the Clean Energy Jobs Act seeks to rapidly expand electric vehicles throughout the state, we want to ensure that everyone has access to this electrification economy, especially in communities where car ownership is not an option. The EV Access for All program will provide incentives for low-income vehicle rebates, as well as EV car sharing programs and electric shuttle programs to serve transit deserts in that last mile. I want to talk next about how we ramp up renewable energy under the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And it's first helpful to take a look at where we are now and how we got here. So Illinois first established its renewable portfolio standard, which is its renewable energy targets, all the way back in 2007. So long ago, ancient history now. A few years later, the state's first wave of renewable energy came online. However, we had then a 6 to 7 year gap because our renewable energy policy was broken. Funds kept getting swept by the state for other needs, and energy suppliers were not building new renewable energy as part of their obligations. They were simply buying credits from projects already built in other states. It was clear that the state needed a centralized, forward-looking planning process for renewable energy development, and that came about through the Future Energy Jobs Act, which passed in 2016, became effective in June of 2017. That bill looked to the Illinois Power Agency to centralize renewable energy procurement, authorizing them to enter into long-term contracts for large renewables and to create an incentive program for rooftop solar and community solar. Those programs just started getting online last year. It takes a while to get some things up and running, but just as soon as we get them up and running, there was so much pent-up demand from that 6 to 7 year gap that we're already hitting our targets ahead of schedule, and it risks coming to a halt. The challenge with that 6 to 7 year gap as well is it put us significantly behind our 25% by 2025 goal. It's not that we can't hit that goal, but we had such a long gap that we have a lot of ground to make up to hit that original goal we set back in 2007. The good news is we think we can hit that and go beyond. The challenge is the Illinois Power Agency says they're now out of money for building more renewable energy until possibly 2024. And that means if we do nothing, we're going to be stuck at 8% renewable energy and fall far short of this current law to get to 25%. So where do we go next? The Clean Energy Jobs Act sets a bold but achievable goal to put Illinois on a path to 100% renewable energy by 2050. Well, there are certainly a lot of questions about how we're going to do that from the years 2040 to 2050. We do know for certain what we can do now. We know we can get to an achievement of 46% renewable energy by 2030, around 50% by 2031, just by keeping on the track that we started with FEJA, the development track that we just kicked the industry off and growing from there, starting immediately. So we know how to get there. We know that we need an immediate acceleration of renewable energy development that will result in 16,500 megawatts of new solar and 7,300 megawatts of new wind by 2030. That's enough to power more than 4 million homes. So we know what needs to be done. Within CEJA, we will increase our renewable energy targets that will ramp up immediately and create a steady growth in renewables over the next 10 years to get to these new targets. It's development that starts right away, not a half decade away. We'll need to increase the budget for renewable energy to account for this growth. But we also use savings from other parts of the bill, such as capacity market reform, to offset these additional costs so customers don't see the rate impacts. The question here and the questions that we face are about priorities, where we want to choose to spend the money we have in our electric bill. So as we develop more renewables, we need to also make sure the process runs smoother. We have proposed improvements to the state's incentive program for renewable energy, which is called the Adjustable Block Program, or Illinois Shines, as well as policies that make interconnection easier for renewable energy companies. It means creating more certainty and protections for customers that invest in their own renewable energy, and to fix net metering timelines so we create certainty and open the doors to community-focused community solar projects. As a state, when we talk about capacity market reform, we have to think about it this way. As the state pursues its energy and environmental goals to reduce pollution, expand new opportunity, and ensure affordable energy, must also look at some of the existing structures that push back against those goals. And that goes back to the question of priorities. How do we spend the money on our electric bill says a lot about our priorities. One of those areas is called capacity markets. Capacity now makes up 20% of your electric bill if you are a customer in Northern Illinois. That's $1.7 billion a year that you are spending that's going to large, mostly polluting power plants. Of that 1.7 billion, more than 1.2 billion is going directly to fossil fuel plants. So how did it get this way? The capacity market in our region was created about 10 years ago when we were in a world of growing electricity use, and the grid operators were looking for a way to incentivize new power plants being built. They created this market that would buy the promise that a power plant would be running at the highest peak times of electricity usage in a year, typically in the summer times when it's hot and humid. The idea was to give power plants a fixed payment to ensure that they would be around at those hours. However, because of widespread energy efficiency in homes, lighting, computers, and other equipment, electricity use is actually going down. And we have had way more power plants than we have needed. And the world looks very different from 10 years ago. But the market never caught up with that. With electricity demand going down and more renewables being built at cheaper costs than ever before, wholesale energy prices have dropped year after year. That's great for consumers, yet older fossil fuel plants with their rising costs and high expenses simply cannot compete in a wholesale market anymore. So they've turned to the capacity market to make up their lost profit. What used to be a simple market to ensure power plants stayed online during these top 5 hours a year has turned into a bailout bonanza for fossil fuel generators. They'll make more than half of their revenue through the capacity market, making money while not running and incentivizing them to run and pollute more. The market is tipped in their favor. Right now, consumers in Northern Illinois are paying more than $1 billion or $1.2 billion per year to bail out these coal and gas plants. Some in Illinois, like environmental justice communities like Waukegan, and some in other states, and that's poised to go even higher. So the bad news that I alluded to before was that appointees of President Trump have decided that the battle cannot wait. And in December, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued an order to further tip the scales toward fossil fuels and capacity markets, something that was already broken and weighted against renewable energy. They're trying to make more so. They ordered a market redesign that says that carbon-free resources such as new wind power, solar power, and nuclear power are effectively to be kicked out of the market, changing the bids of those resources so they can't compete. This rule comes at the request of the coal, gas, and oil industry, who believe that this is a way to nullify state support for things like renewable energy. But when you take all those supply resources out of a market and artificially inflate prices for fossil fuels, it means that consumers will simply pay more. There's no question about that. Right now, we're looking at that customers in Northern Illinois will pay hundreds of millions of dollars or more per year under this new plan than what they pay today, which is already way more than is needed. Trump has long promised to save the coal industry. It's now clear that that's going to be on the backs of consumers and clean energy. Clean Energy Jobs Act, however, doesn't walk away from this fight. It seeks to find a way to get out of the grips of this fossil fuel focused capacity market and instead focus on new renewable energy development and achieving our state's energy, environmental, equity, and public health goals. It creates hundreds of millions of dollars a year in savings, not just from the threat of future costs, but actually savings as compared to today, to invest in Illinois' renewable energy future, jobs and equity, and pollution reduction strategies. It comes back to the question of priorities, how we want to choose to spend the money on our electric bill to achieve what we want to achieve. So if Illinois can take over the procurement of its own capacity and align it with its renewable energy development, avoid overbuying capacity, and avoid overpaying for fossil we don't need and use, there's significant savings and significant opportunity. Rather than arguing simply over a small portion of the charge on our electric bill for renewables, we need to look at the whole market structure to make sure it's aligned with the future that we need. One of the core outputs that we heard from the Listen Lead Share events around the state over the past couple of years was a strong desire to accelerate efforts to achieve a carbon-free power sector in Illinois. At the same time, however, community participants also discussed that it was important to stimulate the economic and environmental well-being of communities disproportionately impacted by the historical operation of and recent and planned closures of fossil fuel power plants. The Clean Energy Jobs Act does this in a parallel approach. First, the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency is empowered to develop and enforce limits on greenhouse gas emissions from Illinois power plants to achieve zero emissions by 2030. When doing so, the Illinois EPA would have to work with the Illinois Environmental Justice Commission to develop an environmental justice analysis and require mandatory emissions reductions first from power plants that are impacting EJ communities. Those power plant owners would also be required to engage in stakeholder processes to proactively plan for retirement impacts on their communities and workers. Second, the Clean Energy Jobs Act creates a new framework for workers and communities called Energy Community Reinvestment. Energy Community Reinvestment targets new investments into Illinois communities and workers impacted by the closure of fossil fuel power plants and closed coal mines, and ensures that those responsible for the pollution are the ones who pay. To qualify for these Energy Community Reinvestment Funds, a community must first be designated as a Clean Energy Empowerment Zone, an effort undertaken by the state's Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity and an independent board. Eligible communities to be declared Clean Energy Empowerment Zones are environmental justice communities, communities impacted by the shift away from fossil fuels, and others as determined by the board. These communities, school districts, and police and fire departments are eligible for financial assistance from the fund to cover reduced property tax revenue or other community needs for a period of up to 5 years. Further, these clean energy empowerment zones are prioritized for renewable energy development, and businesses that locate in the zones or hire displaced workers are eligible for tax credits. The Clean Energy Jobs Act also directs support for fossil fuel power plant and coal mine workers, creating a Displaced Energy Workers Bill of Rights to ensure advance notice of plant closures, career services, financial planning services, and scholarships for displaced workers. The plant operators would also be required to provide new employment information, 1 year of health insurance, and protections for retirement accounts. The State Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity would have a responsibility as well to support workers and drive new investments to communities. The fund raises around $200 million a year from polluters based on their share of pollution in the state, depositing money in a fund that is designed to be available after the plants close to support communities over time. Funds from the polluters are also used to support jobs and equity investments, including the Clean Jobs Workforce Hubs and the Clean Energy Entrepreneurship and Contractor Incubator. Next, we're going to talk about energy efficiency. And energy efficiency should form the basis of any robust clean energy policy. It is the cheapest clean energy resource, and energy efficiency upgrades help customers manage their energy bills directly by reducing their need, and indirectly by holding demand and prices down statewide. Energy efficiency employs almost 87,000 people in Illinois, more than any other clean energy sector, in a diverse range of jobs such as insulation installers, heating and air conditioning engineers, and pipe fitters. CEJA focuses on making Illinois a leader in energy efficiency in the electric and the gas sectors. For gas utilities, CEJA focuses on addressing the significant bill impacts consumers in Illinois are going to start to see in the coming years due to the recent ramp up of gas utility spending, and focuses on reducing bills for the most vulnerable. It's expected that the benefits of these investments will save consumers $700 million per year. Again, the cheapest form of energy is the energy we don't use and don't need. So how do we do that? Well, on the gas side, the bill requires the gas utilities to achieve real energy savings, reducing gas use by 13.5% by 2035, focusing on savings that last over time, not savings that fade away in 3 months or 6 months. This would triple the energy savings of the current gas energy efficiency programs. The bill also requires that utilities spend a minimum of 25% of their program dollars on low-income programs for those least able to afford their gas bills. The program focuses on whole building investments that reduce heating needs. Half of all spending must be for these things that make a building more energy efficient, not just on appliances. So it's insulation, air sealing, ventilation, advanced thermostats, and more. For electric utilities, the CEJA builds on the success of the Future Energy Jobs Act passed 3 years ago. It extends those energy efficiency programs beyond 2030 so that utilities are still incentivized to get long-lasting energy savings. It also increases the amount of investment in low-income programs and ensures energy efficiency programs reach apartment buildings. CEJA dives also into some new innovative ideas that support those least able to pay for retrofits and upgrades to their homes. The first such program is a health and safety fund, which would complement existing low-income programs and would address issues where an energy efficiency contractor has to walk away from low-income home retrofit projects because they discover leaks, mold, asbestos, or other health and safety issues. When we find those issues in homes in our communities, the worst thing we can do is walk away. The second innovative program is the Equitable Energy Financing Program, which is a pay-as-you-save type of program that has proved very successful in other states. It allows residents to finance energy improvements on their electric bills so that they can pay off the project investment on the same timetable that they're getting the savings from it. Altogether, these investments in energy efficiency support new jobs, help us reach our climate goals, and reduce bills for consumers across the state. The last main section I'm going to talk about is transportation. The transportation sector is now the leading source of carbon pollution in Illinois, responsible for roughly 1/3 of all carbon emissions. CEJA has set forth an ambitious goal to remove the equivalent of 1 million gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles from our roads. The number of passenger, medium, and heavy-duty electric vehicles in Illinois could grow to approximately 1.2 million by 2030, but only if Illinois adopts a comprehensive suite of policies to encourage their growth. If managed appropriately, electric vehicle adoption will drastically reduce emissions from transportation and could save Illinois residents a cumulative $35 billion through reduced vehicle fueling and maintenance costs, in addition to better air quality and a safer climate. Illinois residents get additional direct benefits as well by having lower electric bills as more electric vehicles are utilizing the electric grid during off-peak hours. So as the grid relies increasingly on renewable energy, the electricity used to charge these electric vehicles will grow cleaner as well. However, any policy to support electric vehicles must ensure that the benefits of the electric vehicle economy go to everyone. Reducing pollution and improving public health are exponentially more impactful when done in communities already burdened by cumulative pollution impacts from cars, trucks, trains, industry, and other polluters. That's why CEJA prioritizes supporting environmental justice communities, low-income communities, and communities where car ownership is not a viable option. In the legislation, beneficial electrification is broken into 3 main categories. 1, EV access for all. 2, public transit and fleets. 3, mass market adoption. The EV Access for All program directs at least $7.5 million a year to provide rebates for the purchase of electric vehicles for low-income residents, to create electric vehicle car sharing programs, to support electric shuttles, to serve transit deserts, and other innovative programs to support communities that can be developed. We must ensure that all of Illinois has access to the benefits of electric vehicles, even if they're not in the market for a new car. Next, Clean Energy Jobs Act will support electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles that not only contribute to climate change, but their emissions have a significant impact on local air quality, particularly in communities near highways, trucks and train yards, and industrial facilities. Within CEJA, an average of $25 million per year in incentives would go for either vehicle purchase or charging stations that can not only help the CTA reach its goal of electrifying its entire bus fleet, it can help PACE, Metra, Central and Southern Illinois transit agencies, city and county governments, school districts, school bus companies, and other fleets go electric. Investments in medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification will prioritize investments to projects that reduce surface level pollutants in low income and environmental justice communities first. The third core investment by CEJA in electric vehicles is to support mass market adoption. This includes public charging stations, workplace charging stations, fast charging stations along the highways, a rural charging station network, as well as help with home charging stations. While most electric vehicle charging takes place at home or at work, having public charging stations can help build confidence and allow the private market to excel. Along with these investments, however, comes an expectation that the recipients of incentives for electric vehicles must also participate in programs that help avoid new costs to the grid that electric vehicles could bring. By shifting charging from evening times when energy use is high to overnight when energy use is low, we can save billions of dollars a year in grid investment costs. By shifting charging times to when more wind energy and solar energy are producing, we not only ensure the fuel for the vehicles is clean, we help support the integration of more renewable energy onto the grid. Taken together, these investments will support the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of new electric vehicles on the road and improve the public health in communities most impacted by poor air quality and pollution. The last slide I want to show before we open it up for questions is when you add all these investments together, there's kind of two questions. The first is, how do we pay for it? And I feel like we outline extensively how we pay for each piece. We ramp up renewable spending, but offset it with capacity market savings and other benefits from the clean energy economy. When we talk about investments in jobs and equity, we're offsetting that by having polluters pay for the damage they have caused over time. And when we talk about benefits for the communities, we use that same rubric for polluters pay as well. We believe that altogether, if we reprioritize and focus on the money we're already spending, we can invest and accomplish these things without creating significant or impactful cost increases on customers around the state. At the same time, by focusing on new infrastructure investment for renewables and electric vehicles and energy storage and other job training and workforce training, we'll generate about $39 billion in new private investment into Illinois by 2030. That's not what Illinois is spending, that's the new private development that will come into the state. That will not only create $6 billion in total state and local tax revenue by 2040, it creates $1 billion a year in like an average private direct investment for things such as installation, operations, maintenance, sales, marketing, finance and development, engineering, and other core workforce careers. When we think about the need for having a clean energy economy, it's that persistent investment in employment of $1.5 billion a year in workforce that's going to create the consistency in jobs and opportunity as we go forward. I'm going to stop there. I think I did about 40 minutes. I think we have about 15 minutes left for questions. And I don't know, Matt, if you want to read them off and respond. And I've also looked through the participant list, and I've noticed there are several other folks from the Clean Jobs Coalition that are on. So be prepared. You may get called on by me if I feel like it.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That was really great. And yeah, a good number of questions have built up in the chat box here. So I think we'll start working through those. And then we'll try and shift to getting people to ask their questions kind of via video to get some more face time with each other. Again, this is kind of an experiment, so we'll see how that works. But so while I'm reading these off, if folks who are on Zoom would like a chance to ask their question via video, let's try this out. There are a lot of people on the call, so we might not get to everyone, but the way you do that is click participants at the bottom menu there, and then scroll all the way down, I think, and then at the bottom of that, I think there's a button there to raise your hand. And as you raise your hand, that'll keep a stacked list. If you're on the phone and would like to raise your hand, I believe you press *9 and that will add you to the list. So let's give this actually, so I see that George totally raised your hand. George, there are a couple questions ahead of yours. I'm going to read those and then we'll have you ask your question via video, or we'll try it. So thanks for bearing with us, everyone. So the first question is Nicole Salisbury asked, how did the Clean Jobs Coalition come up with the dollar amounts for the pillars in CEJA?
I can go into that. So when we talk about, we really built budgets from the bottom up. So when we looked at the renewable energy development that we needed over the course of the next 30 years, but also more specifically over the course of the next 1 through 10 years. We really looked at where we needed to be, what portion of that would come from utility scale, what would be community solar, rooftop solar, both on businesses and residences, and built those budgets from the ground up. It's been extensive. I think we're on version 54 of budget scenarios where we've modeled them out to come up with a need that we have for the RPS budget that actually can work, so we don't have to come back to the General Assembly every few years. So that's something that we are designing a renewable energy budget that can actually accomplish what we're trying to achieve. And there's a specific attention paid to the impacts in specific years. Budgets are, or like renewable energy projects are paid through a mix of 1-year, 5-year, and 15-year contracts. And so you have to take into account at how and when those costs would hit the budget. So we really wanted to look and build it from a bottom up. When you look at the Clean Jobs Workforce Hubs and the Clean Energy Contractor Incubator, the Workforce Hubs is about 26 million a year. The Clean Energy Contractor Incubator is about $21 million a year. We use the expertise of folks who are doing workforce training programs and running small business support programs throughout the state today, those who have experience in the energy space, and they built program budgets. And we looked at what would it cost to actually have a network of 15, 16 workforce hubs throughout the state. What would each hub need in terms of resources and support? What would the cost be for things such as stipends and supplies and childcare and other resources like that? And really built those bottom-up programs. When we looked at electric vehicles, we did a similar process as on the renewable side to see how many vehicles could we get. There's a lot of analysis involved in figuring out how many public charging stations are needed to support populations of electric vehicles. For example, there's a major difference between the amount of public charging you need if you have 88% of the people charging at home versus 82% of the people charging at home. And so you have to look at where you think you're going to be in terms of home charging to see how much charging infrastructure you need out there in the world, and trying to find a delicate balance. Ultimately, the best we can do right now is establish budgets and projections while leaving the comprehensive planning to the work later. We have to set out some framework and be honest about what some of these things will cost while working within kind of the structures later to figure out exactly how that will come about.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And then not to put you on the spot, but if you would like to show your face to talk to folks, if you disable your screen sharing, I think we'll see you. Again, feel free to do that. That's whatever you prefer.
Thanks, Matt. Matt.
Yeah, no problem, Andrew.
My camera's blocked by a microphone right now, unfortunately.
Oh, sure. Yeah, okay. All right. We'll buy that. Next question is from Rebecca Ratliff, who asks, what exactly does it mean for solar to benefit communities outside of the obvious reductions in pollution, carbon emissions?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's one of the core parts of what we heard from the Listen, Lead, Share sessions and also our experience with the state's community solar program to date. As folks know, there were over 900 projects submitted for about 119 or so openings in the community solar program in the state. The vast majority of those were what are called greenfield projects. So solar projects built on a plat of farmland far away from load, far away from communities, and only a very small percentage, usually driven by pretty thoughtful developers who spend a lot of time working with communities and building support for projects. Only a very small percentage of those actually were organized or had community benefits or community focused. We think that that's backwards. We think that kind of the promise of community solar and why it's different from utility scale solar, which is, you know, inexpensive and in far reaches where there's land and availability. As community solar is really supposed to be driving local community workforce development, wealth building and equity opportunities so that people are getting a share of a project and using that to build wealth and not just sending all their wealth and equity to developers from out of state or bankers. And so finding ways to ensure that the benefit stays local was the original vision of community solar, and it just has not come about as such. So one of the things that CEJA does is it changes what was a lottery process to just pick and choose which community solar projects go forward to a kind of RFP or preference process that ensures that a minimum of 25% of the projects selected are organized by communities, have community benefits, and have other equitable provisions within them. There's still a role there for the mass market projects and allowing, you know, looking at some changes there to make those even more cost effective and easier to interconnect. But we also want to make sure that there is at least 25% of those projects are organized, located in, and directly benefiting communities.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so for this one, we're going to try and have the person ask their own question. So George Tully, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. So George, if you can hear me and want to try asking your question, we'll see if this works.
Great, and thanks so much for putting this on. This is great, and I'm glad we have, you know, make use of this time. I was curious, Andrew, are there any provisions in CEJA that deal with kind of the nitty gritty of electrifying Illinois' building stock, in addition to, you know, the big task of installing electric radiators, electric boilers, hot water tanks, all of that, doing the electrical upgrades, and it just seems like a, you know, transition that is long term. You know, it's a decade long. That's a decade's project, and if that's being considered now, or if that's something down the line that kind of the next bill after this one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we originally put together the language in CEJA about a year ago, leading up to about a year ago when it was introduced. At the time, our focus was on using energy efficiency programs to, rather than incentivizing new equipment, like the worst thing would be incentivizing a new gas boiler that is now a sunk cost for many years to come, focusing on the whole building retrofit. So getting buildings to be the most efficient as possible so that when they did electrify, they would be able to be sized right. Since then, there's obviously been a much larger movement towards electrification in general. And so while it is not in the language in July, there have been many, many groups that have been working on updates and enhancements to CEJA that hopefully can start looking at this pathway to decarbonization for whatever gets put together as a final bill here. So I would say stay tuned, and if you want to be included in some of those discussions, definitely reach out to IEC and they can connect you with folks who are involved in those enhancements.
Great. Okay. I think we have time for a few more questions here. Great.
I'll go quicker.
The next one is from IEC's own Tanisha Harris, who asks, how far behind the 25% goal, I think the 25% renewable goal within CEJA are we?
We are at 6% now, and we are on track to get up to 8%. So we are way far behind. If we pass CEJA, we will immediately ramp up and we will get to 25% by 2025, 46% by 2030, 50% by 2031.
Excellent. That was a quick one. Okay, so next question is from Michael Schmidt, who asks, actually, he's raising his hand, so let's see if this will work too. All right, Michael, I think you're unmuted if you want to ask.
All right, I'm really Connie, but it's a computer thing to get my real name. So it's Connie Schmidt. I'm the chair of the Illinois chapter of Sierra Club. Are there any benefits to community colleges or tech schools to start providing more training for solar and wind jobs? Or are most of the training most of the training dollars going to the IBEW programs?
It's a great question. So within the workforce training hubs, those are designed to be regional coordination hubs that are, and I think we have even been working on language to talk about how they work closely with community colleges and also the unions, but they are community-based organizations that would be the hub administrators and the leaders of those hubs. We want them to work with labor. We want them to work with community colleges within their region, but they would be the focal point of engagement. This is not, I think there's a reference there in FIJA, there was about $3 million of the $10 million for workforce training that was sent directly to IBEW and minimizing the amount that was part of a solar pipeline competitive bidding. This focuses more on building that pipeline, building those workforce hubs, but also encouraging the participation. There's also discussion of there's inclusion there of a clean energy jobs curriculum working group process that gets the Department of Labor, the Illinois Community College Board, State Board of Education, Illinois Board of Higher Ed, labor unions, clean energy developers, and community members to focus on figuring out what is that pathway of curriculum that takes people from high school through community college or university and into the workforce, and making sure that's consistent across the board.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Connie. So moving along here, the next question we have in the chat is from Huey, who asks, how would CEJA affect municipalities that purchase electricity for their residents? My village has a contract with the downstate coal plant.
Yeah, I assume this is a municipality that has a contract with Prairie State. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. That's something we're looking at clearly. I mean, Prairie State makes up a good 15% of the state's carbon emissions. And if we're looking to get to carbon free by 2030, that not only impacts the generating plant, but the interesting thing about Prairie State is that it is a little bit owned. It's not just contracts for supply that communities get from the plant. They also, a lot of communities went into debt. They issued bonds to help fund the plant. Now the original owners of the plant have since bailed, but now it's on the communities and other co-ops, not just in Illinois, but elsewhere. They're on the hook for ownership there. It's something we're looking at closely. We have to make sure we're thinking about not just the plant, Prairie State itself. We're thinking about the community and workers there. We're also thinking about the communities that are stuck in these long-term contracts with Prairie State or other coal plants long-term, and also their local debt that they issued. Those are a lot of problems that together make it a very difficult thing to solve, but it's something that a lot of folks are working on because we know that we have to figure out something there if we are to achieve our goals.
Okay. And then I think this is a good problem to have. We have too many questions. So what I'm doing is, for those that we don't get to, I'm going to copy them, and then we'll try and figure out some way to get responses to folks.
Yeah.
We'll ask one more maybe, and then wrap things up. So the one more here is from Carter O'Brien, who asks, and if Carter, if you're, maybe I can try and. I
can see it. Yeah. So
okay.
Carter, our good friend from the Field Museum, is asking about components related to EV infrastructure and how much are manufactured in Illinois. I know we actually have several folks who historically have been EV manufacturers, from large companies like Eaton and others to even some small startups, but I'm not exactly sure. The good news is there's a Midwest Clean Energy Jobs report coming out very soon that talks about the number of jobs and companies' investment in Illinois and throughout the region. So I will point you to that, and I believe it's E2 that is going to be putting that out soon, I believe.
Great.
The next,
okay,
yeah.
Well, sorry.
No, let me power through because there's a couple clarifying questions that I think I want to make sure I answer.
Okay.
The question was no mention of a severance tax for extractors like coal mines. Is that still a possible funding source? The answer is yes. I didn't mention it specifically in the presentation, but for the polluter pays provision for the energy community reinvestment, there's two sources. One is a coal severance tax. Illinois is one of the only states that does not, that is a coal producing state that does not levy severance tax on coal that is mined from the ground. That is a consistent revenue source that we want to make sure can be reinvested into communities. And the other piece is a fee on polluters, energy community reinvestment fee that's based on their share, a proportionate share of pollution in the state. And then a lot of chat there.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is great. I mean, so I think okay, so yeah, we've got the questions. We're recording this webinar, so we're going to try and figure out a way to share the recording with folks and make it available that way. Andrew, if you would be willing to share this deck, or at least whatever slides you feel making publicly available, we'll do our best to share that as well. And yeah, so IEC has a series of these running. When you registered for this, instead of making people register for, I don't know, we have probably upwards of 30 of these scheduled. We didn't want to make people register for all those individually, so we had you register once, shared a big calendar full of them with you. I think we're going to send an email out twice a week to folks to summarize kind of which webinars we've just finished, which we have coming up. So I think keep an eye out for that. We're super grateful for everyone for joining today. We hit almost 100 people, and that's just to think we put this together kind of late last week is great. And Andrew, just huge thank you to you for being willing to do this and turn it around so quickly. I think I hope that the comments here are a reflection of how people felt about this at large, because it sounds like everyone loved it, and I know it was super helpful to me. If we're making these open, anyone who wants to join can join them, so feel free to share the link. It's a weird time, but hopefully stuff like this will help us keep plugged in. And if you're not a member of IEC, feel free to join us. Tucker dropped the link into the chat there. And yeah, thank you again. We really appreciate everyone jumping on. And with that, I'll wrap things up. Thanks again.